This is the image of General Radahn we have held for years. A mindless cannibal, wandering the scarlet dunes of Caelid, gorging on the corpses of friends and foes alike. A warrior who held back the stars simply because he could. A display of raw power from the strongest of the demigods. We looked at the Starscourge and saw a beast. A man who loved war so much he fought until his brain rotted away. But just like with Mog, we were missing the most important piece of the puzzle. We saw the what, but we completely misunderstood the why. I would argue that General Radahn is not defined by his strength, nor by his gravity magic, nor even by his legendary battle with Millennia. He is defined by a single, secret vow, a promise made in his youth that would ultimately doom him to a fate worse than death. Because when we learned the truth in the shadow of the Erdtree, that Radahn was Miquella's promised consort, it didn't just recontextualize the final boss fight of the DLC, it recontextualized the entire history of the Shattering. Suddenly, the Battle of Caelid wasn't just a territorial dispute or a clash of egos. It was a desperate attempt to enforce a contract. And Radahn holding back the stars wasn't just a flex of gravity magic. I believe it was an act of supreme defiance. It was the only way he could say no to a god who does not accept refusal. Today, we are going to uncover the real reason Radahn stopped the cosmos. We are going to look at the vow mentioned by Millennia, the secret whispered in his ear right before the scarlet rot bloomed, and the tragic reality of a kind-hearted general who paralyzed fate itself to protect his family, his town, and perhaps his own free will. This is the story of the Starscourge's last stand, not against the stars, but against his own destiny. Let us start by looking at the vow itself, because the specific wording used in the DLC changes everything. Throughout the base game, we assumed Radahn and Millennia fought because of the Great Runes. The opening cinematic tells us the mad taint of their newfound strength triggered the Shattering. We bought into the idea of a free-for-all war. But the DLC reveals something specific. Miquella awaited Radahn. Millennia marched south not to conquer, but to kill Radahn so his soul could be freed for resurrection. She whispers to him, Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort. This implies that Radahn had to die. But here is the contradiction that has puzzled everyone. If Radahn agreed to be Miquella's consort, as the remembrance suggests, why did Millennia have to march across the entire continent to nuke him with rot? Why did Radahn fight back so ferociously? Why didn't he just go? Some people think Radahn went back on his word, that he promised Miquella he would be his lord, but then got cold feet, or fell in love with war, or simply changed his mind. And that is a valid interpretation, but I think it is too simple for a character of Radahn's depth. I would argue that Radahn didn't just change his mind. I think he realized what Miquella's age of compassion actually meant. He realized that becoming Miquella's lord meant losing himself, just like Mog did. And this brings us to the stars. Freeze on the moment we defeat Radahn in the base game. The stars resume their movement, and a meteor crashes into Limgrave, opening the way to Nokron. We always knew Radahn held the stars to protect Sellia, the town of magic where he learned his gravity arts. It is a noble reason, fitting for a man who learned gravity magic just so he wouldn't crush his scrawny horse. But is protecting one town enough motivation to stall the destiny of the entire Carrion royal family? To halt the fate of Ranni, his own sister? I don't think so. I think protecting Sellia was the result of holding the stars, not the primary cause. Radahn is a Carrion. He knows how fate works. He knows that the stars govern the destiny of the Carrion royals. The fate of the Carrion royal family is guided by the stars. By stopping the stars, Radahn wasn't just freezing the sky. He was pressing the pause button on fate itself. Why would he do that? Consider the timeline. If Miquella's plan required Radahn's death and resurrection, and if that plan was written in the stars or ordained by fate, then holding back the stars was a tactical maneuver to halt Miquella's plan. As long as the stars were still, fate could not progress. Ranni could not execute her plan, and perhaps more importantly, Miquella could not execute his. This paints Radahn not as a warmonger, but as a guardian holding the door shut against a cosmic inevitability. He knew that if the stars moved, the mechanism of fate would grind him up. So he conquered the sky. He challenged the falling stars and won, suspending the entire world in a state of stasis just to buy time. It was an act of unimaginable power. Sustained for centuries, even while his mind was rotting away. But to truly understand this, we have to look deeper at the Carrion connection. Radahn isn't just a brute. He is the son of Rennala and Radagon. He is a scholar of the stars. And I think his relationship with his siblings, Ranni and Rykard, holds the key to why he resisted Miquella so fiercely. To understand the magnitude of Radahn's sacrifice, we have to step away from the scarlet rot of Caelid and walk into the drawing room of Volcano Manor. It is a place of blasphemy, of snake men and torture, yet hanging there, in a place of absolute honor, is a pristine portrait of General Radahn. Rykard, the Lord of Blasphemy, the man who fed himself to a serpent to devour the very gods Radahn served, kept a loving image of his brother on his wall. I would argue this is one of the most important environmental storytelling details in the entire game. It proves that despite their wildly different paths, the Carrion siblings, Radahn, Rykard, and Ranni, were not enemies. In fact, I believe they began the Shattering as a united front, a Carrion triad designed to dismantle the control of the Greater Will from 3 different angles. Consider the evidence. We know Ranni and Rykard were conspirators. The item description of the blasphemous claw tells us explicitly that Ranni rewarded her brother Rykard with a trace of destined death on the night of the dire plot. They were working together to slay Godwyn and shake the foundations of the Golden Order. Ranni was the assassin, striking from the shadows. Rykard was the inquisitor, preparing to challenge the Erdtree directly with blasphemy. But what about Radahn? Where does the Starscourge fit into this family conspiracy? The conventional reading is that Radahn was the Golden Order loyalist of the family, the one who idolized Godfrey and loved the Erdtree, putting him at odds with his rebellious siblings. But I think that is a surface-level interpretation. Radahn idolized Godfrey for his strength. Yes, but he was proud of his Carrion heritage. He is described as the son of Radagon and Rennala first. I propose that Radahn's role in this alliance was to be the shield. While Ranni prepared the knife and Rykard prepared the poison, Radahn prepared the stalemate. He went to Sellia. He mastered the gravity magic of the Alabaster Lords, and he looked to the sky. He knew that the Greater Will exerted control through the stars and the beasts that fell from them. He knew that fate was a mechanism of control, so he volunteered for the hardest job of all. He volunteered to hold the world still. This recontextualizes the Starscourge conflict entirely. It wasn't just a man fighting rocks. It was a metaphysical blockade. By freezing the stars, Radahn prevented the Greater Will from sending reinforcements. He prevented the Astals from landing, and crucially, he created a pause in destiny that would allow his siblings to maneuver without being checkmated by fate. But here is where the tragedy sets in, and where Miquella's interference likely shattered this alliance. The stalemate Radahn created was too effective. It worked too well. It stopped the Golden Order, but it also stopped Ranni. The stars needed to move for Ranni to access Nokron and retrieve the Fingerslayer blade. Radahn knew this. He knew that by holding the stars, he was blocking his sister's path to godhood. So why did he keep holding them? Why didn't he let go once Ranni was ready? I think this is where the threat of Miquella becomes the deciding factor. Radahn likely realized that Miquella's Age of Compassion was a far more immediate and terrifying threat than the stagnation of the stars. He saw Miquella building the Erdtree, saw him soliciting affection, saw the bewitching branches at work. Radahn realized that if he let the stars move to help Ranni, he would also be unlocking the eclipse for Miquella. It was a variation of the trolley problem on a cosmic scale. If Radahn drops the stars, Ranni might succeed, but Miquella definitely succeeds. And Miquella's success involves the enslavement of wills, including Radahn's own. So the general made the heartbreaking choice to maintain the blockade. He chose to hurt his sister's chances in order to prevent his brother's tyranny. This explains the hostility and the shattering. It explains why Ranni eventually sends the tarnished, us, to kill her own brother. It is not done out of malice, but out of necessity. She knows Radahn will never let go. She knows he is stubborn, protective, and terrified of what Miquella will do if the stars align. When we speak to Ranni and her war counselor Iji, they speak of Radahn with a mix of frustration and somber respect. They don't call him a traitor, they call him an obstacle. General Radahn is the great inhibitor of the stars. That is how Iji describes him. Not a villain, an inhibitor. A dam holding back a river that desperately wants to flow. And let us not forget the physical toll this took on the Carrion Alliance. Rykard fell into depravity, perhaps despairing that the plan had stalled. Ranni was forced into hiding as a doll, waiting for centuries for the stars to move. And Radahn? Radahn was left alone on the battlefield, holding the sky up with his mind, waiting for Miquella to come for him. The breaking of the Carrion Triad is the hidden tragedy of the game. They had the power to overthrow the Greater Will together. They had the magic, the blasphemy, and the might. But Miquella's existence and the vow he tried to enforce drove a wedge between them that shattered the world. Radahn had to choose between his sister's freedom and his own. And being the lion, he chose to fight. He chose to hold the line, even if it meant becoming the enemy of the very family he sought to protect. So when you look at that portrait in Volcano Manor now, don't just see a brother honoring a brother. See it as a memorial to a failed revolution. See it as Rykard remembering the time before the stars stopped, before the rot, before the vow ruined everything. It is a picture of a man who was supposed to be the shield of the Carrions, but ended up becoming their jailer, trapped by the very strength he used to defend them. Now we arrive at the epicenter of the tragedy, the Battle of Aeonia. To understand the depth of Radahn's defiance, we must analyze the most devastating military campaign in the history of the lands between. For years, we viewed Malenia's march south as a campaign of conquest. We thought she was fighting for territory, or perhaps for great runes to mend the Elden Ring. But looking at the map, her movements make no strategic sense for a conqueror. She bypassed Lindell. She humiliated Godric in Limgrave but left him alive and in power. And she marched straight for the Caelid Wilds. I would argue this wasn't a war. It was a retrieval mission. Malenia wasn't acting as a general expanding an empire. She was acting as a jagged needle sent to pop a blister. Miquella needed the stars to move. Radahn refused to let them go. So Miquella sent his blade, the undefeated swordswoman, to forcibly extract Radahn's soul from his body so it could be processed for the new age. Freeze on the cinematic of their duel. It is the most iconic image in the game. Malenia and Radahn locked in a stalemate, but look closer at the dynamic. Radahn is not attacking, he is waiting. He allows Malenia to reattach her prosthetic arm. He holds his ground. This mirrors his cosmic stance. He is the wall. She is the battering ram. He is fighting to maintain the status quo. She is fighting to break it. And then comes the whisper. For 2 years, we speculated on what Malenia said to Radahn right before she bloomed. Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort. When we finally heard this confirmed in the DLC, it sent shivers down the spine of the lore community. But analyze the tone. It wasn't a seduction, and it wasn't a plea. It was a sentence. She was reading him his rights before the execution. This moment is crucial because it reveals that Radahn was winning. Or at least, he was winning the contest of wills. Malenia realized that conventional warfare would not break him. He was too strong, too stubborn, and too anchored by his gravity magic. Even the greatest swordswoman in history could not force him to submit. So she had to do the unthinkable. She had to abandon her dignity and unleash the Scarlet Rot. I believe the Scarlet Bloom wasn't a tactical nuke intended to kill an army. It was a biological key designed to break a specific lock. Malenia knew that Radahn's concentration was divided. Half his mind was on the fight. The other half was in the stratosphere, holding back the weight of the cosmos. By infecting him with the rot, by melting his brain and body from the inside out, she was trying to sever that connection. She was trying to make the pain so unbearable that he would instinctively drop the stars. But he didn't. This is the single greatest feat of strength in the entire Elden Ring mythos. It isn't that he fought Malenia to a draw. It isn't that he survived the nuke. It is that even as his brain dissolved into scarlet mush, even as his feet rotted away until he was dragging stumps through the sand, even as he lost the ability to speak or think or recognize his own men, he never dropped the stars. The subconscious imperative to hold was so deeply ingrained in his psyche that it outlived his sanity. It is a terrifying level of willpower. It suggests that his fear of Miquella's plan, or his devotion to his own duty, was primal. It went deeper than conscious thought. He became a living battery of gravity magic, fueled by nothing but defiance. This turns the aftermath of Aeonia into a horror story for Malenia and Miquella. Imagine their reaction. Malenia sacrificed everything: her dignity, her unalloyed gold needle, the health of her brother's Erdtree, and the entire region of Caelid. She plunged the world into a biological nightmare. And for what? The stars were still fixed. The eclipse still couldn't happen. The fate of the Empyreans was still paused. Radahn had technically lost the fight, but he had won the war of attrition. He had created a scenario where Miquella could not advance. The general was mad. Yes, but the door was still locked. This is why Miquella had to go to such extreme lengths in the DLC. He couldn't just wait for Radahn to die naturally, because Radahn refused to die. He couldn't wait for the stars to move, because Radahn wouldn't let them. So the plan shifted. Miquella had to divest himself of his flesh and travel to the land of shadow to set up the resurrection ritual manually. And he had to wait for a third party, the Tarnished, to finish what Millennia couldn't. He needed us to go to the festival, kill the body that refused to die, and finally release the soul that refused to yield. This explains why we find Millennia sleeping in the Erdtree. She isn't just recovering from the battle. She is comatose from failure. She broke the world, but failed to break the general. The stalemate of Ionia wasn't a draw. It was a catastrophic failure for Miquella's timeline. It delayed his godhood by an age. And consider the soldiers of Radahn left behind in the rot. The Redmanes. They use fire to keep the rot at bay. They are fighting a losing war to contain the mess Millennia made. But notice that they never turn on their general. Even in his madness, they respect the burden he carries. They know, perhaps instinctively, that he is the only thing standing between the world and total cosmic collapse. When we walk through Caelid, we are walking through the wreckage of an assassination attempt that failed. Every giant dog, every crow, every lake of rot is a testament to how hard Miquella tried to force Radahn's hand. And standing in the center of it all, howling at the sky, is the general, broken, mindless, eating the dead, but still, miraculously, holding the line. He is the ultimate immovable object, and it took the breaking of the entire world to try and move him. Now we turn our eyes to Redmane Castle, the fortress at the edge of the world where the final act of Radahn's tragedy plays out. The Radahn Festival. For most players, this is just a cool boss fight mechanic, a way to summon a bunch of NPCs for a raid boss. But narratively, the festival is the breaking point of the stalemate. It is the moment the world finally conspired to force the general's hand. I would argue that the festival was not merely a celebration of war, as Jaren claims. It was a desperate biological intervention. Witch hunter Jaren, a guest commander who swore an oath to Radahn, organized this event for one specific purpose: to grant his friend an honorable death. Jaren knew that Radahn was no longer Radahn. He was a husk, eaten by rot, running on instinct. But Jaren also knew something else. He knew that Radahn would never stop fighting. He would never lay down his arms and die quietly. The only way to end his suffering, and arguably, to unlock the fate of the Carians, was to kill him in combat. But notice who attends the festival. It isn't just random mercenaries. It is a gathering of champions guided by grace. Blade the half-wolf is there, seeking to free the stars for Ranni. Alexander the warrior jar is there, seeking glory. And we, the Tarnished, are there. We are all drawn to Caelid like moths to a flame. Why? Because the guidance of grace, which we now suspect is manipulated by Marika or perhaps Miquella, is steering us there. The world itself is trying to remove the cork from the bottle. When the festival begins, Jaren shouts, "The stars have aligned. The festival is nigh." This is a telling choice of words. The stars haven't actually aligned yet. They are frozen. He is speaking metaphorically. The pieces have aligned. The executioners have arrived. The fight itself is a testament to Radahn's impossible strength. He is mindless, rotted, and feetless. Yet he still requires an entire army of champions to take him down. He rains arrows like ballistic missiles. He turns himself into a meteor. He wields gravity with the precision of a master, despite having the mind of a beast. This reinforces the idea that his holding of the stars was not a passive spell he cast once and forgot. It was an active, ongoing channel of power. Even while fighting 5 champions at once, he never dropped the sky. Until he died. The moment Radahn falls is one of the most significant turning points in the game's history. The cutscene shows the stars resuming their motion immediately. It is instantaneous. The moment his heart stops, the spell breaks. And what happens? A literal meteor crashes into the earth, smashing open the way to Nokron. This confirms everything we suspected. Radahn was literally holding up the heavens. But consider the immediate aftermath. Who benefits? Ranni benefits first. The path to Nokron opens. She gets her Fingerslayer blade. She kills her 2 fingers. This makes it seem like Radahn was the villain of Ranni's story, the obstacle blocking her path. And in a way, he was. But remember the Carrion Triad theory. He wasn't blocking her out of malice. He was blocking the entire board to stop Miquella. With Radahn dead, the stalemate is broken. Ranni makes her move, but Miquella makes his move too. We didn't see it at the time, because Miquella operates in the shadows, but by killing Radahn, we completed the first step of Miquella's DLC plan. We sent Radahn's soul to the Shadow Realm. We did exactly what Malenia failed to do. We became the surgeon who extracted the soul from the vessel. This casts a dark shadow over our victory. We felt like heroes. We honored the general. We freed the stars. We helped Ranni. But we also inadvertently armed the gun that Miquella would point at us in the shadow of the Erdtree. We gave him his consort. And look at Jaren after the fight. He sits quietly, looking at the empty battlefield. He says he fulfilled his promise. But there is a heaviness to him. He knows that the Redmanes are now truly leaderless. The gravity magic that defined their legion is gone. The general is gone, and the rot remains. The festival didn't fix Caelid. It just removed its guardian. I find it fascinating that Malenia is nowhere to be seen during this time. She is asleep in the Erdtree. She doesn't know that the Tarnished succeeded where she failed. Miquella's plan relied on a contingency. A plan B. If Malenia couldn't kill Radahn, then Miquella had to wait for a Tarnished strong enough to do it. This aligns with the theory that Miquella guided us. He gave us Torrent through Ranni. He gave us the Spirit Bell through Ranni. He was equipping us to be his hitman. So the festival wasn't a celebration. It was a funeral service for the world's immune system. Radahn was the fever fighting the infection. By killing him, we broke the fever, but we allowed the virus to spread. We allowed fate to resume its march toward the eclipse, toward the Erdtree, and toward the gate of divinity. And one final detail about the stars. When they fall, they don't just open Nokron. They bring falling star beasts and astals, creatures of the void. Radahn was keeping them out. By killing him, we literally lowered the planetary shields. We made the lands between vulnerable to cosmic horrors, just so the demigods could resume their political bickering. It really highlights the tragedy of Radahn's sacrifice. He was protecting a world that was desperate to kill him. Now we must turn the clock back, all the way back, before the rot, before the shattering, to the golden days of the Erdtree. To understand why Radahn fought so hard to escape his fate, we have to understand how he got entangled in it to begin with. We need to analyze the final memory of the shadow of the Erdtree, the fleeting vision of a young Miquella praying to an empty chair. This scene is the Rosetta Stone for the entire conflict. Miquella speaks to an absent Radahn, calling him Lord Brother. He says, "I'm going to be a god. If we honor our part of the vow, Promise me you'll be my consort. Freeze on that sentence. If we honor our part of the vow. I would argue that this conditional phrasing is the most important line of dialogue in the DLC. It implies a transaction, a two-sided agreement. It suggests that Miquella had to fulfill a condition before Radahn would agree to serve him. If we do X, you do Y? But what was Miquella's part of the vow? What did he promise the Red Lion in exchange for his eternal servitude? We don't know for sure, but we can speculate based on Radahn's character. Radahn idolized Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. He idolized strength, order, and battlefield honor. It is highly likely that Miquella promised a world where these virtues would be upheld. A world better than the crumbling golden order of Marika. Miquella likely pitched his Age of Compassion not as a tyranny of mind control, but as a utopia where the strong protect the weak, mirroring Radahn's own protective nature. I believe Radahn, being the kind-hearted brother who loved his horse and his siblings, agreed to this in principle. He likely viewed it as a childhood promise, a supportive nod to his younger brother's ambition. Sure, Miquella, if you actually manage to become a god, I'll be your lord, just like Godfrey. It was a promise made in the innocence of an era that hadn't yet known war. But then the world changed. The shattering happened. Miquella's methods became darker. He abandoned the Golden Order fundamentalism to create the Erdtree. He began using the bewitching branches. He started to compel affection rather than earn it. And Radahn, watching from his fortress in Caelid, likely realized that Miquella was not building a utopia. He was building a cage. This is where the vow turned from a promise into a curse. Miquella viewed the agreement as absolute. In his mind, he was fulfilling his part. He was becoming a god. Therefore, Radahn owed him his service. Miquella's childish naivety could not comprehend that Radahn might have changed his mind upon seeing the reality of Miquella's methods. To Miquella, consent is a static thing. Once given, it cannot be revoked. This is consistent with his terrifying power to charm. He overrides the current will of a person with their past affection. So when Malenia marched on Caelid, she wasn't just an invader, she was a debt collector. She was there to enforce a contract that Radahn no longer wanted to honor. This transforms the Battle of Aeonia from a war of conquest into a contract dispute settled with biological weapons. Radahn was fighting for his right to say, "I changed my mind." Malenia was fighting to say, "You don't get to." And notice the tragedy of Miquella's position in that final memory. He is talking to an empty chair. Radahn isn't there. Even in the memory of the vow, there is a distance between them. It suggests that perhaps Radahn was never as fully on board as Miquella believed, or that Miquella was projecting his desires onto a brother who was merely being polite. The empty chair is a symbol of Miquella's delusion. He is planning a wedding with a groom who hasn't shown up. This dynamic mirrors the relationship between Marika and Godfrey, but twisted. Godfrey was a lord who chose to serve. Radahn was a lord who was forced to serve. Radahn idolized Godfrey. He wore the lion armor to emulate him, but in the end, he suffered a fate diametrically opposed to his hero. Godfrey was exiled but retained his free will. Radahn was kept in the lands between, but stripped of his. I also want to point out the physical difference between the brothers. Miquella is cursed with eternal youth, trapped in the body of a child. Radahn is a giant, expanding until he physically outgrows his horse. They are opposites in every way. One grows forever, one never grows. One relies on physical might, the other on manipulation. Miquella coveting Radahn's strength makes narrative sense. He wants what he lacks. He wants a body that commands respect to complement a mind that compels love. But Radahn didn't need Miquella. He had the stars. He had the Redmanes. He had his gravity magic. He was complete on his own. This makes Miquella's pursuit of him feel predatory. It is the needy sibling consuming the independent one. So, the conditional contract was broken. Miquella failed to honor the spirit of the vow, to be a god worthy of the Red Lion, even as he tried to honor the letter of it. And Radahn, seeing the monster his brother was becoming, decided that the only way to void the contract was to halt the flow of time itself. He stopped the stars, not just to pause fate, but to pause the deadline of the debt he owed. As long as the stars stood still, Miquella could not ascend. And if Miquella could not ascend, the condition, if I become a god, could never be met. Radahn found the loophole in the contract and held it open with gravity magic for 1,000 years. It was the ultimate legal defense strategy, enforced by the strongest muscles in the lands between. Now we must turn our gaze west, away from the scarlet dunes of Caelid and toward the jagged peaks of Mount Gelmir. If Radahn was the shield of the Carrion Alliance, holding back the stars to pause the machinations of the gods, then Rykard was the dagger hidden behind the back. We often separate the lore of the praetor from the general, viewing Rykard's descent into snake worship as a separate tragedy. But I would argue that Rykard's blasphemy is directly tied to Radahn's sacrifice. Consider the timeline. Radahn halts the stars. The board is frozen. But Radahn is eventually poisoned by millennia. He begins to rot. His mind begins to fade. The stalemate he created is in danger of breaking not because of an external force, but because the battery powering it, Radahn himself, is dying. I believe this is the moment Rykard made his choice. He saw his brother, the strongest demigod, the lion, reduced to a mindless beast by the agents of the Erdtree. He saw that honor, strength, and gravity magic were not enough to defeat the soft power of Miquella or the biological warfare of millennia. Radahn played by the rules of war and lost his mind for it. So Rykard decided to stop playing by the rules entirely. I will not just pause the gods, I will devour them. This recontextualizes the gruesome ritual at Volcano Manor. Rykard allowing himself to be eaten by the god-devouring serpent wasn't just madness, it was a desperate escalation. He saw that Radahn's passive resistance, holding the stars, was failing. The Golden Order and Miquella were too relentless. So he chose the nuclear option. He sacrificed his humanity to become an immortal monster capable of eating the opposition whole. And there is physical evidence of this continued alliance in Redmane Castle. When we arrive at the festival, what do we see guarding the courtyard? Abductor virgins. These are war machines created by Rykard, painted with his heraldry, designed to capture sacrifices for the serpent. Why are they in Radahn's fortress? Some might say they are invaders, but they aren't attacking the Redmanes. They are stationed there. I would argue they were sent by Rykard as reinforcements, even as he lost himself to the serpent, and even as Radahn lost himself to the rot. The pact between brothers held. Rykard sent his most terrifying machines to guard his dying brother's castle, perhaps to protect Radahn from the mercy kill, or perhaps to ensure that if Radahn finally fell, there would be something left to hold the line. It adds a layer of brotherhood to the horror. Rykard is often depicted as the most selfish demigod, but he kept a portrait of Radahn in his dining room. He sent his machines to aid Radahn's army. He seems to be the only one who truly understood what Radahn was doing. While the rest of the world saw a mad beast, Rykard saw a brother holding up the sky until his arms broke, and Rykard hated the gods for it. This hatred is fueled by the tragedy of the vow we discussed. If Rykard knew that Miquella had manipulated Radahn, if he knew that the Battle of Aeonia was an attempt to enslave his brother, his blasphemy makes perfect sense. It is a reaction to the cruelty of the Empyreans. You want to control us? You want to charm us? Fine. Come closer. We will eat you. But there is a tragic irony here. Radahn idolized Godfrey and the Golden Order. He loved the Erdtree. Rykard swore to burn the Erdtree to the ground. Ideologically, they were opposites, yet they were united by a common enemy. Radahn fought to maintain the status quo to prevent a worse future, while Rykard fought to destroy everything to prevent that same future. They were the two extremes of the Carian response to Miquella. Radahn was the conservative resistance, holding on to the past. Rykard was the destructive resistance, burning down the future, and in the middle sat Ranni, calculating, cold, waiting for the stars to move so she could escape the board entirely. When we kill Rykard, he tells us that a serpent never dies. When we kill Radahn, the stars move. Both brothers failed in their own way. Rykard became a gluttonous monster who forgot his purpose in favor of hunger. Radahn became a mindless ghoul who forgot his purpose in favor of instinct. But for a brief moment in history, before the rot and the snake took over, they formed a terrifying wall against the ambition of Miquella. I also want to highlight the sadness of the Redmane soldiers using fire. Fire is a blasphemous element in the eyes of the Golden Order, especially the flame of the giants. Yet the Redmanes use it to fight the Scarlet Rot. Who specializes in blasphemous fire? Rykard. Did Rykard share the secrets of fire with Radahn's army to help them fight the Rot? It is very likely. The Flame Cleanse Me incantation and the usage of fire in Caelid suggest a transfer of knowledge. It paints a picture of Rykard trying to save his brother from afar. He couldn't cure the Rot, but he could give Radahn's soldiers the tools to burn it back. It is a distant, twisted act of love from one monster to another. So when we analyze why Radahn held the stars, we have to consider that he wasn't doing it alone. He was the anchor of a three-pronged conspiracy, and as long as he held the sky, Rykard felt safe enough to feed himself to a snake, and Ranni felt safe enough to shed her flesh. He was the big brother protecting his siblings while they prepared their own desperate escape plans. The tragedy is that they left him behind. Ranni ascended to the stars. Rykard merged with the serpent, but Radahn was left on the beach, rotting, holding the weight of their shared destiny until his knees buckled. He was the foundation of the Carian resistance, and like all foundations, he was buried so the others could rise. We have talked about Radahn holding back fate, and we have talked about him holding back Miquella. But there is a third, far more terrifying thing he was holding back. To understand the true scale of the general's burden, we must look at what happens the moment he dies. A star falls, but it doesn't just crash, it opens the earth. And from the craters created by falling stars in the lands between, we see creatures emerging. Falling star beasts, alabaster lords, and deep below the ground, the malformed stars known as astals. I would argue that the Starscourge title is not just poetic, it is literal. Radahn was not just pausing a political timeline. He was acting as a planetary defense system. The lands between is constantly under siege by entities from the void. The Greater Will itself arrived on a golden star. The Alabaster Lords were born from a meteor impact. The Astals are described as malformed stars that destroyed the eternal cities. Space in Elden Ring is not empty. It is full of hostile life. By freezing the movement of the stars, Radahn was effectively putting a force field around the planet. He was saying no more. No more outer gods sending their vassals. No more meteors destroying cities. No more cosmic interference. He locked the borders of reality. This sheds new light on his relationship with the Alabaster Lords. The item descriptions tell us that a young Radahn studied gravity magic under an Alabaster Lord to continue riding his horse. Leonard. It is a sweet story. But think about who his teacher was. An Alabaster Lord is a being of stone, born from a meteor strike, a creature of the void. Did this mentor warn Radahn? Did he show the young demigod what lies in the darkness between the stars? I believe Radahn learned the terrifying truth of the cosmos early in his life. He realized that the greatest threat to the lands between wasn't the giants or the dragons, but the void itself. So he mastered the gravitational arts, not just to save his horse, but to save the world from the fate of the eternal cities. He saw what an Astal did to Nokron, stealing their sky and burying them underground, and he swore that Caelid and the surface world would never suffer the same fate. This creates a heartbreaking dichotomy in his character. On the surface, he is the lion, a symbol of beast-like strength and aggression, but in practice, he is the ultimate preservationist. He preserves his horse. He preserves his town. He preserves the Golden Order, and he preserves the safety of the planet from cosmic horror. He is a tank, but his playstyle is entirely defensive. Now, contrast this with Miquella. Miquella welcomes the outer influences if they suit his needs. He seeks to usher in a new age, regardless of the cosmic consequences. Miquella's order is one of unalloyed gold, which seeks to ward away the influence of outer gods. Yet Miquella's actions constantly invite instability. By demanding the stars to move, Miquella was willing to risk a void invasion just to get his eclipse. He was willing to lower the planetary shields to achieve his personal ascension. This is the fundamental conflict. Radahn prioritized safety and stability over evolution. Miquella prioritized evolution over safety. When millennia bloomed in Aeonia, she wasn't just breaking a stalemate. She was trying to shatter the shield of the world. And look at the physical toll of gravity magic. In the lore, gravity magic is often associated with intelligence, not faith. It requires calculation, understanding, and mental fortitude. Radahn wasn't holding the stars with his muscles. He was holding them with his mind, even as the scarlet rot ate away his frontal lobe, destroying his memories, his personality, and his sanity. That mental grip never faltered. How is that possible? How can a man who eats corpses still cast a continent-spanning spell? I think the answer lies in Leonard, that scrawny horse tucked beneath his massive frame. Leonard is not just a mount. He is a living anchor. Radahn learned gravity magic for Leonard. Every time he used that magic, he was reminded of his love for that horse. Over centuries, the spell to hold became synonymous with the instinct to protect. When his mind rotted away, the complex calculations of the Alabaster Lords were lost. But the primal instinct remained. Protect the horse, protect the town, protect the sky. The magic shifted from an intellectual pursuit to a biological imperative. He became a gravity well of pure instinct. This is why he is so dangerous in the festival. He isn't casting spells, he is the spell. This makes our role as the Tarnished even darker. When we kill Radahn, we are greeted by a meteor crash. We think, cool, new area unlocked, but from the perspective of the world's inhabitants, it must have been terrifying. The sky finally moved, and the first thing it did was throw a rock at them. We undid the work of a lifetime in a single afternoon. And what did Miquella do with this opening? He didn't send armies to fight the falling beasts. He didn't try to protect the people from the void. He used the shifting of fate to further his own path to the gate of divinity. He stepped over the corpse of his brother and the crater in Limgrave without a second thought. It reinforces the idea that Radahn was the only adult in the room. Ranni wanted to burn the Order down and leave for the stars. Rykard wanted to eat the gods. Miquella wanted to brainwash everyone into being nice. Only Radahn looked at the threats facing the world. The rot, the void, the instability, and decided to hold the line. He was the Atlas of the lands between, punished not by Zeus, but by his own family. And his reward for this vigilance? He is remembered as a brute, a warmonger who loved battle. Even the festival that kills him celebrates his warlust, not his sacrifice. Jaren calls him the General, emphasizing his offense. No one calls him the Guardian. The history books were written by the victors, or at least by the survivors. And the survivors preferred to see a mad dog that needed to be put down, rather than a hero who was holding back the apocalypse. As we move to the next section, we need to examine the specific mechanics of Miquella's resurrection ritual in the DLC. Because if Radahn was the shield of the world, Miquella's plan was to turn that shield into a sword. He didn't just want Radahn dead. He wanted to repurpose that cosmic strength for his own enforcement. He wanted to take the man who held back the stars and make him hold down the subjects of the new age. Now we arrive at the gruesome reality of the promise fulfilled. We have established that Radahn likely rejected Miquella's plan, choosing to hold the stars rather than submit. But Miquella is not a god who takes rejection lightly. If he could not have Radahn the man, he would settle for Radahn the soul. And if he could not have Radahn's body, which was destroyed by scarlet rot, he would build a new one. The mechanics of the resurrection ritual at the Gate of Divinity are horrifyingly specific. The secret rite scroll found in the DLC explicitly outlines the requirements for a Lord's return. A Lord will usher in a God's return, and the Lord's soul will require a vessel. Note the wording. It does not say the Lord's body, it says a vessel. Any vessel will do, as long as it is strong enough. This reveals the depth of Miquella's premeditation. He knew Radahn's original body was ruined. The scarlet rot had turned the general into a biohazard. There was no saving that flesh, so Miquella needed a spare part. And who did he choose? Mogji, his own half-brother, the Omen twin, the very antithesis of everything Radahn stood for. I would argue this is the ultimate desecration of General Radahn. Radahn was a man of the Golden Order. He idolized Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. He wore armor depicting lions. He represented the shining, heroic ideal of the Erdtree. And Miquella stuffed his soul into the horned, accursed body of an omen. Imagine waking up from death. You are Radahn. You fought for centuries to protect the world from the void. You died a warrior's death at the hands of champions, and then you wake up. But you are not in your own skin. Your arms are wreathed in blood flame, a heretical power. Your body feels wrong, twisted, and clinging to your back, whispering into your ear, is the brother you spent an eternity trying to escape. This isn't resurrection. It is necromancy. It is Frankenstein's monster played out on a divine scale. Miquella didn't bring Radahn back. He salvaged him. He treated his brother's soul like software that could simply be installed into new hardware. It strips Radahn of his humanity entirely, reducing him to a component in Miquella's godhood engine. And look at the moveset of promised consort Radahn. He uses Blood Flame. He uses Omen abilities. These are not skills Radahn learned. These are residual reflexes of the body he is trapped in. It suggests a terrifying lack of control. Is Radahn even driving this body? Or is he just a passenger in Mohg's corpse? While Miquella steers? The silence we discussed earlier makes even more sense in this context. Perhaps Radahn can't speak. Perhaps the fusion of a Golden Order soul and an Omen body, stitched together by Miquella's charm, has left him unable to articulate anything beyond a grunt of exertion. Or perhaps he is screaming on the inside, horrified by what he has become. This ritual also casts a dark light on Miquella's age of compassion. Miquella claims he wants to make a world where the weak are embraced. Yet his first act as a god is to cannibalize two of his brothers to create a bodyguard. He uses Mohg's flesh and Radahn's soul like raw materials. There is no compassion here. There is only utility. It mirrors the crafting system of the game. We take items, break them down, and craft something new. Miquella crafted a consort. He looked at the shattering of the Elden Ring and decided that instead of fixing the world, he would fix the players. He fixed Mohg by killing him. He fixed Radahn by enslaving him. And consider the Redmanes again. If Freya or Jaren saw this thing at the gate of divinity, would they recognize it as their general? They might recognize the lion armor or the gravity magic. But the soul, the honor, the red lion spirit, that is gone. Miquella didn't resurrect the general. He resurrected the weapon. This distinction is vital because it explains why Radahn had to die in the base game. It wasn't just to stop the stars. Miquella needed the soul to be separate from the body. As long as Radahn lived, his soul was anchored to his rotting flesh. By killing him, we freed the software so Miquella could download it. We were not liberators. We were data extractors. And what about the gravity magic in the final fight? Radahn still uses it. He pulls us in. He flies into the air. He crashes down like a meteor. Miquella clearly valued this power above all else. Why? Because the age of compassion needs an enforcer. An age where everyone is charmed into loving each other sounds peaceful. But what happens when the charm breaks? What happens when someone resists? You need a gravity well to hold them down. I believe Miquella coveted Radahn not just for his strength, but specifically for his ability to hold things in place. Radahn held the stars for 1,000 years. Miquella wanted that same binding power applied to his new order. He wanted a lord who could grab the world by the throat and say, "Be still, be peaceful, be mine." Radahn's defensive magic, used to protect Sellia and Leonard, was perverted into an oppressive force. The gravity that once shielded the weak is now used to crush the defiant. It is the final inversion of Radahn's character. The guardian becomes the jailer. In the next section, we need to look at the tragedy of Miquella himself in this equation. Because to achieve this Frankenstein divinity, Miquella had to sacrifice just as much as Radahn. He had to become a monster to control a monster. We have spent a lot of time analyzing Radahn as the victim, and rightly so. But to fully understand the horror of the final boss fight, we must look at the perpetrator, Miquella. For years, the lore community viewed Miquella as the good demigod. the one who created the Erdtree to shelter the unwanted, the one who sought to cure millennia, the one who seemed to genuinely care. But the shadow of the Erdtree reveals a terrifying cost to his ascension. To become a god capable of ushering in the age of compassion. Miquella believed he had to strip himself of everything that made him human. He had to divest himself of his flesh, his lineage, his fear, and ultimately, his love. I would argue that the Miquella we fight in the finale is not the same Miquella who made the vow to Radahn, the Miquella who loved his brother, who gifted him the golden epitaph to grant him a true death, who looked up to the red lion's strength. That Miquella is gone. He was left behind in the fissure, abandoned in the form of Saint Trina, frieze on the image of Saint Trina in the deep purple garden. She is the discarded half of the Empyrean, the embodiment of his love. Miquella literally tore his own heart out and threw it into a hole because he viewed it as a hindrance to godhood. He believed that love was a weakness that would prevent him from doing what was necessary. This creates a divine paradox that makes the enslavement of Radahn even more tragic. Miquella claims to be building an age of compassion. But how can you build an age of love when you have surgically removed your ability to feel it? You can't. You can only build an age of enforced love, an age of mind control. This explains the cold utility with which he treats Radahn. The Miquella of the past, the one who made the childhood vow, might have hesitated to desecrate his brother's soul. He might have mourned the loss of Radahn's personality. But the god Miquella, the entity that rides upon Radahn's back, he feels nothing. He sees Radahn not as a brother, but as a necessary engine for his new order. It is a chilling realization. Radahn is trapped in a marriage with a spouse who has lobotomized himself. And consider the physical journey Miquella took. We find his crosses scattered across the land of shadow. I abandon here my flesh. I abandon here my eyes. I abandon here my heart. It is a ritual of suicide by degrees. Miquella killed himself slowly, piece by piece, until only the pure, unalloyed ambition remained. This contextualizes the Battle of Ionia and the kidnapping of Mohg in a new light. These weren't just strategic moves. They were steps in a dehumanization process. Miquella was systematically cutting ties with his humanity. He sent millennia to nuke Caelid because he had already begun to view his siblings as assets rather than family. He used Mohg because he had already abandoned the concept of familial loyalty. So when Radahn stands before us in the finale, silent and robotic, he is a mirror to Miquella. Radahn has lost his mind to the charm. Miquella has lost his heart to the ritual. They are two hollow shells of demigods, propping each other up in a mockery of their former glory. The promised consort and the kindly god are just titles worn by ghosts. This sheds light on why Saint Trina asks us to kill Miquella. Death to Miquella. It sounds like a betrayal, but it is an act of mercy. Saint Trina knows that what Miquella is becoming is a prison. She knows that a god without love is a tyrant, and she knows that Miquella is trapping himself in a cage of divinity just as surely as he is trapping Radahn. I think Radahn, in his prime, saw this coming. He saw the fanaticism in Miquella's eyes. He saw the way Miquella discarded anything that didn't fit his perfect vision. And Radahn, being a man who refused to discard even a horse that was too small for him, recognized the fundamental incompatibility of their worldviews. Radahn's philosophy was keep everything, protect everything, even if it's broken. Miquella's philosophy was fix everything, even if you have to break it to do so. By holding back the stars, Radahn was trying to stop the world from being fixed by a madman. He preferred the broken, rotting stagnation of the shattering to the sterile, loveless perfection of Miquella's order. And looking at the final boss, a silent puppet and a heartless god, it is hard to argue he was wrong. The tragedy is that Miquella likely believes he is doing this for Radahn. In his twisted logic, he is saving his brother from the rot, saving him from the war, giving him a purpose. He cannot see that he has destroyed the very person he wanted to save, because he has destroyed the part of himself capable of recognizing that loss. So, the final battle isn't a wedding. It is a collision of two tragedies. The tragedy of the brother who loved too much, Radahn holding the stars, and the tragedy of the brother who loved too little, Miquella abandoning Saint Trina. And we, the Tarnished, are the divorce lawyers sent to settle the estate. Now we must look at the terrifying reality of what Radahn was trying to prevent. We have talked about the age of compassion in abstract terms, but the final boss fight gives us a concrete demonstration of what it actually looks like. I am talking about the grab attack. It is the most unique and disturbing mechanic in the entire expansion. When Miquella grabs you, he doesn't deal damage. He doesn't burn you or rot you. He whispers to you, "I promise you a 1,000-year voyage guided by compassion." If he grabs you a second time, you don't die in the traditional sense. You don't crumble to dust. Instead, the words "heart stolen" appear on the screen. Your character kneels. You lose control. The fight ends not because you were defeated in combat, but because you were converted. I would argue that this is not just a game mechanic. It is a political manifesto. It is a vertical slice of Miquella's entire philosophy. In his age of compassion, there is no conflict, because there is no dissent. If you disagree with the god, he doesn't debate you. He doesn't even fight you. He simply rewrites your brain until you agree. He loves you so much that he destroys your capacity to choose anything other than him. This validates everything Radahn did. Radahn was a warrior. His entire worldview was based on conflict, on strength, on the clash of wills. To a man like Radahn, the idea of a world where conflict is solved by magical lobotomy is not a utopia. It is a nightmare. It is the death of the warrior's soul. Radahn fought millennia to a standstill. He fought the stars to a standstill. He valued the struggle. He valued the act of resistance. Miquella's grab attack removes the possibility of struggle. It forces a surrender that feels like bliss, but is actually oblivion. When Radahn held back the stars, he was holding back a future where heart stolen is the law of the land. And look at the emote we get. Let us go together. It is the pose Miquella forces us into. It is a pose of submission disguised as prayer. Miquella isn't asking for companions. He is collecting pets. He views Radahn, Mog, and the Tarnished not as equals, but as things to be kept and cared for, stripped of their dangerous autonomy. This casts the Golden Order in a surprisingly favorable light. The Golden Order was flawed, racist, and broken, but it allowed for free will, or at least, it allowed for heresy. You could choose to be a blasphemer like Rykard. You could choose to be a conspirator like Ranni. You could choose to fight against it. Marika punished dissent, yes, but she didn't remove the capacity for it. Miquella's order is far more terrifying because it solves the problem of heresy by removing the free will required to commit it. This is the compassion Radahn feared. It is the compassion of a gardener who prunes every branch that grows in the wrong direction. Radahn was a wild oak. growing massive and unruly. He knew he would be the first to be pruned. And notice the irony of Miquella's great rune, which we find broken. It is the rune of abundance. But what did Miquella use it for? To charm, to control, to compel. He abandoned his own great rune because even it wasn't enough. He needed to become the embodiment of the charm itself. When we fight Radahn in that arena, we are the last line of defense for free will. We are fighting to preserve the right to be wrong, the right to fight, the right to struggle. If Miquella wins, the world enters a stasis far worse than the one Radahn created. Radahn paused fate. Miquella wants to end it. He wants to create an unalloyed eternity where nothing bad ever happens because nothing real ever happens. So, the Starscourge wasn't just protecting the physical world from meteors. He was protecting the metaphysical world from stagnation. He preferred a dangerous freedom to a safe slavery, and that is why he is the greatest hero of the shattering. He saw the golden cage descending from the heavens, and he used gravity magic to push it back up for as long as he could. To further cement the idea that Radahn was playing a 4D chess game against fate, we need to look at the man he trusted to end his life. Witch Hunter Jaren. This is one of the most peculiar relationships in the game. Jaren is an eccentric wanderer, a man who served the Carrion Royals, hunted witches, and eventually became a guest commander for the Redmanes. Why would a general who idolized the Golden Order and Godfrey align himself with a witch hunter? And why would he entrust the most important task, his own execution, to this man specifically? I would argue that Jaren was Radahn's contingency plan. Radahn knew that his defiance of Miquella and the stars came with a terrible risk. He knew that if he ever faltered, if his mind ever broke, he would become a weapon for the very forces he was fighting. Whether it was the rot, the madness, or Miquella's charm. Radahn understood that a living Radahn who had lost his will was the most dangerous thing in the world. So, he swore an oath with Jaren. If I lose myself, you must kill me, and you must do it with honor. This isn't just a warrior seeking a glorious end. This is a strategic burn notice. Radahn was setting up a failsafe to ensure that his body could not be piloted by anyone else. He wanted to die completely. He wanted a warrior's death that would destroy his vessel so thoroughly that nothing could inhabit it. The tragedy of the Radahn festival is that it succeeded in the killing, but failed in the destruction. We gathered, we fought, we killed the general, but we left the corpse. We left the soul to be harvested. Jaren thought he was freeing his friend from the rot. He didn't realize he was freeing his friend's soul to be intercepted by Miquella. This recontextualizes Jaren's dialogue after the fight. At last, the war is done. The general can rest. Jaren sounds relieved, but also final. He believes the loop is closed. He has no idea that in the land of shadow, Miquella is catching the soul Jaren just released. It makes Jaren an unwitting accomplice to the horror. The man who loved Radahn enough to kill him is the man who accidentally handed him over to his abuser. And look at the banner of the festival. It is red, depicting the lion. It is a celebration of Radahn's identity. Miquella's final act is to strip that identity. The festival celebrated the man. The resurrection exploits the myth. The existence of this oath proves that Radahn had foresight. He didn't just charge into battle blindly. He knew the stakes. He knew that there were fates worse than death, specifically, the fate of becoming a puppet. He tried to engineer his own exit strategy. The fact that even this failsafe was subverted by Miquella shows just how terrifyingly competent the Empyrean is. Miquella anticipated the festival. He accounted for the honorable death. He turned Radahn's suicide pact into a recruitment drive. It is also worth noting that Jaren uses a flamberge, a weapon associated with burning. The Redmanes use fire. Radahn burns from the inside with his great rune. The theme of burning away the rot is central to Radahn's faction. They are trying to purify the world of stagnation. Miquella, conversely, represents a different kind of stagnation, the stagnation of eternal youth, of unalloyed gold that never tarnishes because it never changes. Radahn and Jaren were fighting for the natural cycle of life and death. A warrior fights, a warrior dies. Miquella fights for a cycle where no one ever truly dies. They just get repurposed, where hearts are stolen, not stopped. So when we stand in that boss arena in Kaleed, looking at Jaren, we are looking at the only man who truly understood what Radahn wanted. He wanted to end. He wanted the book to close. And the tragedy of the DLC is that Miquella ripped the last page out and wrote a sequel that Radahn never agreed to star in. To fully grasp the strategic genius of Radahn's stalemate, we must travel far to the north, to the frozen ramparts of Castle Sol. Here, we find a ghost kneeling in defeat, whispering an apology to Miquella. Lord Miquella, forgive me. The sun has not been swallowed. Our prayers were lacking. Your comrade remains soulless. I would argue this is the most damning piece of evidence against the Radahn as a warmonger narrative. It confirms that Miquella had a specific astronomical requirement for his plans: a solar eclipse. The soulless comrade refers to Godwyn the Golden, whose true death Miquella sought to bring about. Or perhaps it refers to the ritual needed to resurrect a soul at the gate of divinity. Regardless of the specific target, the mechanism is clear. Miquella needed the sun to be swallowed. He needed the stars to align, but they couldn't, because Radahn was holding them. This transforms Radahn's gravity magic from a defensive shield into an offensive blockade. By freezing the cosmos, Radahn wasn't just protecting Sellia, he was actively starving Miquella's ritual. He was the reason the prayers at Castle Sol failed. He was the reason the eclipse never came. The general, from his rot-infested dunes in Kaleed, was projecting his will all the way to the mountaintops of the giants, denying his brother the celestial event he needed to become a god. Think about the cruelty of this choice. Radahn likely knew about Godwyn. He knew his half-brother was a living corpse spreading deathroot across the lands. A true death via the eclipse would have been a mercy for Godwyn and a relief for the world. But Radahn refused to allow it. Why? Because he knew the eclipse was a Trojan horse. He knew that if he allowed the stars to move for Godwyn's sake, he would also be allowing them to move for Miquella's sake. He would be unlocking the path to the gate of divinity. So Quartzeum, Radahn made the utilitarian choice of a hardened general. He chose to leave Godwyn in agony and let the world suffer the death root, rather than risk the tyranny of Miquella's age of compassion. It is a brutal calculus. I will let one brother rot in the roots to prevent another brother from enslaving the world. This is not the decision of a mindless beast. This is the decision of a cold, calculating tactician who understands that in war, sometimes you have to sacrifice a friendly unit to hold the line. And look at the weapon found at Castle Sol, the Eclipse Shotel. Its description states it is stored away and depicts the eclipsed sun drained of color. It is a symbol of failed ambition. The fact that Malenia marched south to fight Radahn right after Miquella's plans at Castle Sol failed is not a coincidence. It was a direct retaliation. You stopped the sun, so I will bring the rot. The Battle of Ionia was effectively a clash between the sun and the stars. Miquella tried to force the sun to hide, eclipse. Radahn forced the stars to freeze, stasis. It was a celestial war fought on a terrestrial battlefield. And again, Radahn won. The sun never set. The eclipse never happened. The ritual at Castle Sol remained a failure until the moment we, the Tarnished, killed the general. This also sheds light on why Miquella abandoned the Golden Order fundamentalism. He realized that the Order could not cure Malenia, and it could not grant Godwyn a true death. But why couldn't it? Perhaps because the Order relies on the current configuration of the Elden Ring, which Radahn was partially upholding by freezing fate. Miquella had to step outside the Order, outside the lands between, and eventually outside his own body, just to bypass the roadblock Radahn created. I find it tragic that Miquella likely viewed Radahn's stubbornness as a betrayal of their brotherhood. I am trying to save Godwyn. I am trying to cure Malenia. Why won't you let the stars move? Miquella sees the immediate good. Radahn sees the ultimate cost. It is the classic conflict between the idealist who wants to fix everything and the realist who knows that the fix is worse than the problem. And let's not forget the walking mausoleums. They carry the soulless demigods, waiting for an eclipse that never comes. They wander aimlessly, bells tolling, stuck in the same limbo that Radahn imposed on the world. Radahn's gravity magic didn't just stop the sky. It paused the grieving process of the entire pantheon. He forced the world to live in its trauma rather than move past it, because moving past it meant walking into Miquella's trap. So, when we finally kill Radahn, we aren't just unlocking Nokron, we are unlocking the grief of the world. We are allowing the sun to move, the eclipse to be possible, and the dead to finally die. It feels like a righteous act, but we must remember, Miquella is waiting for exactly this moment. He weaponizes our need for closure. He knows we want to fix the world. He knows we want to help Ranni, help Fia, help the soulless demigods. He uses our benevolence as the key to his own ascension. Radahn was the only one willing to be the bad guy. He was willing to be the Starscourge who denied the world its healing because he knew the healing was poisoned. He stood in the doorway of history and said no further. And it took a literal army of champions and a god-slaying Tarnished to finally push him out of the way. Now we arrive at the visual climax of the DLC, the image that defines the final boss fight. Miquella the Kind, hair flowing like gold, riding upon the back of the promised consort Radahn for many. This visual evoked memories of Prince Lothric and Lorien from Dark Souls 3, a symbiotic relationship of brothers facing the end of the world. But I would argue the true parallel here, and the true tragedy, is the perversion of the imagery surrounding Godfrey and Sarosh. Radahn idolized Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. He modified his armor to depict lions. He embodied the ferocity of the beast. He sought to be the lord of the battlefield just like his hero. In Godfrey's case, the beast Sarosh was grafted onto his back to act as a limiter. Sarosh was there to suppress Godfrey's bloodlust, to civilize the warrior so he could act as a proper lord. It was a consensual burden taken on to fit the role of a ruler. In Miquella's case, the dynamic is horrifyingly inverted. Miquella is not a limiter, he is an accelerant. He is not there to civilize Radahn, He is there to pilot him. Look at the way Miquella's spectral arms wrap around Radahn's neck. It isn't an embrace, it is a yoke. The golden light that erupts from Radahn isn't his own power. It is Miquella channeling divinity through him as a conduit. This visual confirms that Miquella didn't just want a husband, he wanted a war mount. He saw the way Sarosh rode Godfrey and thought, I can do that, but better. He saw Radahn not as a partner to stand beside him, but as a throne to sit upon. This reduces the mighty general, the man who stopped the stars, to nothing more than a glorified chair for a frail god. And consider the conflicting natures of their powers. Radahn represents gravity, the force that grounds things, that gives them weight and reality. Miquella represents unalloyed gold and light, forces that are ethereal, transcendent, and effectively weightless. When you combine them, you don't get harmony. You get a violation of physics. You have a being that should be grounded being forced to ascend, a being of mass being puppeteered by a ghost. This incompatibility is written into the very mechanics of the fight. Radahn's attacks are heavy, physical, brutal. Miquella's follow-up attacks are light-speed beams of holiness. They don't blend, they layer. It feels disjointed because it is disjointed. It is two separate entities forced into the same space, fighting for dominance over the same vessel. I believe this physical incompatibility mirrors their ideological incompatibility. Radahn was a conservative force, preserving the order and the world as it was. Miquella is a radical progressive, seeking to rewrite the metaphysics of reality. Forcing them together is like trying to mix oil and water. You have to shake the jar violently to make it happen. And the shaking was the shattering war itself. It also casts a dark shadow on Miquella's title, the Kind. Is it kindness to resurrect your brother against his will? Is it kindness to stitch his soul into a cursed body? Miquella likely believes it is. In his twisted logic, he has saved Radahn. He has cured him of the scarlet rot by giving him a new body. He has ended his mindless wandering, and he has given him a purpose in the new age. To Miquella, this is the ultimate act of brotherly love. But to Radahn, and to us, it is the ultimate violation. It denies Radahn the right to his own end. A warrior's life is defined by his death. Radahn fought for a good death at the festival. Miquella stole that from him. He hit undo on Radahn's sacrifice and dragged him back to the office. This is why the promised consort title feels so hollow. A promise implies consent. A consort implies partnership. But what we see in that arena is a hostage situation disguised as a wedding. Miquella is the kidnapper who has convinced himself he is the savior. And Radahn is the silent victim who is too strong to die, but not strong enough to leave. The tragedy is that Radahn's idolization of Godfrey became the blueprint for his enslavement. By striving to be the perfect lord, he made himself the perfect target for a god looking for a vessel. If he had been weaker, if he had been less legendary, Miquella might have looked elsewhere. His own greatness was the beacon that summoned his doom. To truly dismantle the idea that Radahn needed Miquella to fix him or teach him compassion, we need to look at a character introduced in the DLC who recontextualizes Radahn's youth, Commander Gaius. For years, the base game told us that Radahn learned gravity magic for his horse. It was a solitary image of kindness. But the shadow of the Erdtree reveals that Radahn was not a loner. He had a rival, a peer, and a friend in Gaius. Gaius is an Albinoric. In the lands between, Albinorics are the lowest of the low. They are artificial life forms, reviled by the Golden Order, tortured by the Omen Killers, and treated as subhuman. Yet the remembrance of the wild boar rider tells us that both he and Radahn studied under the same Alabaster Lord. They were good rivals, freeze on that implication. General Radahn, the mightiest demigod, the Lion of the Golden Order, viewed an Albinoric as his equal. He studied alongside him. He competed with him. He treated him with a respect that was virtually non-existent elsewhere in the world. I would argue this proves that Radahn already possessed the compassion Miquella claimed to offer. Miquella's brand of compassion is about sheltering the weak, treating them like broken things that need to be hidden away in the Erdtree. It is a patronizing love. Radahn's compassion was about empowerment. He didn't hide Gaius. He raced him. He didn't pity Leonard. He learned magic so they could ride together into battle. Radahn didn't care about your race, your birth, or your curse. He cared about your strength and your honor. If you could hold a sword, you were a Redmane. This is evident in the diversity of his festival attendees, a pot, a wolfman, a tarnished, and in his friendship with Gaius. He created a meritocracy of strength that was far more inclusive than the Golden Order he served. This makes Miquella's intervention even more insulting. Miquella wanted to usher in an age of compassion to save the outcasts. But Radahn was already doing it. He was doing it through camaraderie rather than mind control. He was proving that an Albinoric could be a commander, not just a refugee. By killing Radahn and enslaving him, Miquella didn't just destroy a warrior. He destroyed a man who, in his own rough way, was already bridging the gaps between the races of the lands between. He took a leader who inspired loyalty across faction lines and turned him into a silent enforcer. And consider Gaius's tragedy. He is found in the Shadow Realm, guarding the Erdtree chalice. He is an Albinoric riding a boar, mirroring Radahn riding his horse. He uses gravity magic. He is the dark reflection of what Radahn could have been if he hadn't been cursed by rot. Gaius fights us to protect the memory of the old world, or perhaps to protect the Erdtree. But notice where he is. He is separated from his rival. Did Gaius know about the plot? Did he know his rival was being targeted by Miquella? The fact that Gaius is in the Shadow Realm implies he might have followed Miquella, perhaps hoping to see Radahn again, or perhaps he was charmed too. But his existence serves as a testament to Radahn's humanity. You cannot paint Radahn as a mindless brute when his best friend was a member of the most oppressed minority in the world. It also highlights the difference in their mounts. Radahn used magic to make himself light for Leonard. Gaius rides a massive boar that seems capable of carrying him without magic. They both refuse to abandon their companions. This shared trait, loyalty to animals, is a specific coding from software uses to denote good characters. The Nameless King, Artorias, Radahn, Gaius. Miquella has no mount. He rides people. He rides Torrent, formerly. He rides Millennia, metaphorically using her. He rides Moog, using his body. And finally, he rides Radahn. He views living beings as vehicles. Radahn viewed them as partners. This fundamental difference in how they treat their inferiors is why Radahn had to resist. He likely looked at Miquella's love and saw it for what it was: utilization. He knew that if he submitted, he wouldn't be Miquella's partner. He would be Miquella's Leonard. And unlike the horse, Radahn was not content to simply be carried. So, the tragedy of Caelid is also the tragedy of the loss of this inclusive warrior culture. The Redmanes are the only faction that seems to truly love their leader. The Cleanrot Knights serve out of reverence for a god. The Golden Order soldiers serve out of fear or duty. But the Redmanes serve with a rowdy, boisterous love. They hold festivals. They cheer. That culture of brotherhood died with Radahn, and it was replaced by the silent, sterile obedience of Miquella's new order. In the next section, we need to address the victim we haven't spoken enough about, Malenia. Because if Radahn was the target, Malenia was the weapon, and weapons break when you use them too hard. Now we turn our attention to the other casualty of Miquella's ambition, Malenia, Blade of Miquella. For the longest time, we viewed Malenia as Miquella's protector, the sword to his shield. Her title implies agency. She is the blade who fights for her brother's vision. But after analyzing the fallout of Aeonia and the revelations of the DLC, I would argue that Malenia was not a partner in this plan. She was ammunition. Miquella needed Radahn dead. He knew Radahn was too strong to be defeated by conventional armies, so he made the calculated decision to deploy a nuclear option. He sent his sister, knowing full well that to defeat the Starscourge, she would likely have to break the very needle that was keeping her alive. This is the darkest stain on Miquella's kindness. He spent his life researching unalloyed gold to cure Malenia of the scarlet rot. He built the Erdtree as a sanctuary for her. Yet, when his ambition required it, he sent her into a battle where she would be forced to undo all of that progress. The blooming in Caelid wasn't an accident. It was a tactical necessity that Miquella accepted as the cost of doing business. Freeze on the image of the scarlet Aeonia. It is a flower of absolute devastation. But for Malenia, it is a symbol of failure. She had spent her entire life fighting the rot, training with the blind swordsman to master the flow of water, to suppress the stagnation of decay. By blooming, she betrayed her master's teachings, she betrayed her own resistance, and she destroyed her own body. She threw away her dignity to secure a husband for her brother. And what did she get in return? Abandonment. When Finley, the Cleanrot Knight, carried Malenia's unconscious body all the way from Caelid back to the Erdtree, a feat of heroism that deserves its own video, what did Malenia wake up to? An empty throne. Miquella was gone. While she was in a coma recovering from the suicide mission he sent her on, Miquella had allowed himself to be kidnapped by Mohg to pursue his destiny in the land of shadow. She wakes up alone. She sits at the base of the Erdtree, waiting for his return. I dreamt for so long. My flesh was dull gold, and my blood, rotted, corpse after corpse, left in my wake, as I awaited his return. The tragedy in her voice is palpable. She believes he will come back. She believes the plan is still in motion. She doesn't realize that Miquella has moved on to a new plan that requires shedding his flesh, and arguably, shedding his past attachments. Malenia is the ultimate past attachment. She is the living reminder of the rot he could not cure, and the golden order he could not fix. I would argue that Miquella abandoned the Erdtree not just because it failed to grow, but because it was filled with his failures. Malenia failed to kill Radahn. The tree failed to become an Erdtree. So he left it all behind to start fresh in the Shadow Realm. Malenia is left guarding an empty house, fighting a tarnished who has no business being there, defending a brother who is already miles away, metaphysically speaking. And look at the undefeated title she clings to. I am Malenia, Blade of Miquella, and I have never known defeat. It sounds like a boast, But in this context, it sounds like a desperate cope. She did know defeat. She failed her primary objective in Caelid. Radahn survived. The stars didn't move. She had to be carried home unconscious. If that isn't a loss, I don't know what is. But she clings to the undefeated moniker because it's the only thing she has left. If she admits she lost in Caelid, she admits that her sacrifice was for nothing. This reframes the fight against Malenia. She isn't fighting us to stop us from becoming Elden Lord. She is fighting us because we are intruders in the tomb of her ambition. She is a broken weapon left to rust in a garden that never bloomed. It also explains why Miquella never mentions her in the DLC. He talks about Radahn constantly. He talks about Godwyn via the eclipse. But Malenia? His twin? The one who fought his wars? Silence. It seems that once the blade chipped, he lost interest in wielding it. He found a new toy, a sturdier vessel in Radahn. This utilitarian view of his sister is consistent with his treatment of Trina, Mohg, and Radahn. Miquella loves people in the abstract, as concepts or tools. But the moment they're messy, physical reality becomes an inconvenience. Malenia's rot, Mohg's omen blood, Trina's love. He discards them. So when we finally kill Malenia, we are doing her a kindness. We are freeing her from a vigil that has no end. We are releasing her from the service of a god who has already replaced her, and in her final moments, she praises him. Oh, dearest Miquella, my brother, I'm sorry. I finally met my match. She apologizes for dying. She apologizes for not being useful enough. It is the heartbreaking final words of a victim who never realized she was being abused. In the grand calculus of the shattering, Malenia was the most powerful pawn on the board. But she was still just a pawn. Miquella sacrificed her to checkmate Radahn, and when the move resulted in a stalemate, he simply swept the pieces off the table and started a new game in a different dimension. Now we must turn the mirror upon ourselves. The Tarnished. In every From Software game, we play the role of the disruptor, the agent of change who enters a stagnant world and kicks over the anthill. But in the case of General Radahn and Miquella, I would argue our role is far more sinister. We are not just the hero of the story. We are the unwitting hitman hired to clean up a botched assassination. Consider the entry requirements for the Shadow of the Erdtree expansion. To access the Land of Shadow, you must defeat two specific bosses, Starscourge Radahn and Mohg, Lord of Blood. For a long time, players assumed this was simply a gameplay gate, a test of strength to ensure you were high-level enough for the DLC. But From Software rarely separates gameplay from narrative. These two deaths are not just stat checks, they are ritual components. Miquella needed two things to ascend. He needed his vessel, Mohg's body, and he needed his consort, Radahn's soul. Neither of these assets were available to him at the start of the game. Mohg was alive and hiding in his dynasty. Radahn was alive and holding back the stars. Miquella, having divested himself of his flesh and power, could not kill them himself. Malenia had failed to kill Radahn. The Erdtree Knights could not reach Mohg. So, who does the kindly god turn to? The one entity in the lands between with the capacity to kill demigods and a lack of political allegiance, the Tarnished. I believe Miquella, or at least the guidance he left behind, steered us toward these specific kills. Look at the gifts we receive early in the game. Who gives us Torrent? Ranni, but she tells us she was entrusted with him by his former master. The spectral steed whistle is made of unalloyed gold, Miquella's signature metal. Who gives us the spirit calling bell? Ranni again, entrusted by the same former master. Miquella armed us. He gave us the mobility to traverse the lands and the spirit ashes to fight the demigods. He groomed us to be the champion Malenia couldn't be. He needed a weapon that wouldn't break, and the tarnished, fueled by the guidance of grace and the ability to respawn, is the ultimate weapon of attrition. This recontextualizes the Radahn festival yet again. When we arrive, Blade and Alexander are there, guided by their own fates. But we are the deciding factor. Radahn fights us with everything he has, but I wonder if, deep down in the rotted remnants of his mind, he recognized us, not as an enemy, but as the release he had been waiting for. Radahn had been holding the stars for an eternity. He was tired. He was rotting. He knew that eventually his strength would fail, or Miquella would find another way to enslave him. His only hope for a dignified exit was to be killed in combat before Miquella's ritual could be completed. He wanted to die as the Starscourge, not rise as the puppet. But the tragedy is that our victory over him didn't grant him that freedom. By killing him, we played right into Miquella's hands. We sent his soul straight to the processing plant in the Shadow Realm. We thought we were giving a general an honorable send-off, but we were actually packaging him for shipping. And then we went to Mogwyn Palace. We killed Mog, the kidnapper. We stood before the cocoon and felt righteous. But by killing Mog, we provided the corpse. We cleared the room so Leda and the other followers could enter. We did the dirty work that Miquella's hands were too clean to do. This makes the Tarnished the most effective agent of the Age of Compassion. Even if we oppose it, we are the ones who broke the stalemate of the shattering. Radahn was the cork. We were the corkscrew. And every time we swung our weapon, we were advancing a plot we didn't understand until it was too late. It creates a profound sense of guilt when you enter the final boss arena in the DLC. You see Radahn standing there in Mog's body, and you realize, I did this. I killed the body he is wearing. I killed the soul that is piloting it. I created this monster, and perhaps Radahn knows it too. In that final fight, he targets us with a ferocity that feels personal. Is he angry? Is he trying to punish us for our part in his enslavement? Or is he simply mindless? I prefer to think that some part of the Red Lion remains, horrified by what we have done, trying to crush us to end the nightmare we helped create. We are the unwitting executioner. We walked into a cold war between siblings, Radahn holding the line, Miquella trying to cross it, and we decided the winner with our sword. We chose Miquella, not because we believed in his politics, but because he gave us a horse and pointed us toward the loot. We sold the freedom of the cosmos for a spectral steed and a spirit bell. This is the dark genius of the game's narrative. It makes the player complicit. We cannot claim innocence. We are the reason the stars moved. We are the reason the eclipse became possible, metaphysically. We are the reason the general is no longer the general, but a consort. And as we prepare to enter the final sections of this analysis, we must ask ourselves, knowing what we know now, was it right to kill Radahn? If we had left him in the desert, howling at the sky, holding back the stars, would the world have been safer? Would the tyranny of the charm have been avoided? I would argue yes. The rot was bad. The stagnation was bad. But a world where free will exists, even in a broken state, is infinitely preferable to a world where a god creates his perfect consort out of the spare parts of his brothers. Radahn was the dam holding back a flood of golden tyranny, and we blew it up. We have discussed the politics, the biology, and the tragedy of this conflict. But to truly understand the real reason Radahn resisted, we must look at the metaphysics. In the world of Elden Ring, magic is not just distinct from physics, it is physics. Sorcery is the study of stars, crystals, and light. Incantations are the study of order, causality, and regression. Radahn mastered gravity. Gravity is the fundamental force of attraction. It pulls things together. It grants weight. It grounds reality. When Radahn uses his power, he is asserting the physical reality of the world. I am here. You are here. The ground is beneath us. It is a magic of presence. Contrast this with Miquella. Miquella's power is charm. It is a magic of delusion. It overrides reality with a preferred narrative. When Miquella charms you, he isn't changing the physical world. He is changing your perception of it. He removes the weight of your grievances, the gravity of your sins, and leaves you floating in a blissful, unburdened state. I would argue that Radahn held back the stars because he fundamentally rejected a world built on delusion. As a master of gravity, he respected the weight of things. He respected consequences. If a meteor falls, it should hit the ground. If a war is fought, people should die. If a general rots, he should scream. Miquella's order seeks to remove the weight of existence. He wants to create a world without the heavy consequences of the Golden Order. No more persecution, no more rot, no more suffering. But to do that, he has to detach the world from reality. He has to sever the connection between action and consequence. This is why the visual of Radahn floating in the final boss fight is so jarring. Radahn, the master of gravity, should never float. He should be heavy. He should crater the earth when he lands. But under Miquella's influence, he becomes weightless. He drifts like a spirit. Miquella has stripped him of his defining physical trait, his mass, and turned him into a light, airy puppet. This is a violation of Radahn's metaphysical identity. He spent his life studying how to hold things down, his horse, the stars, the armies of Caelid. Miquella forces him to let things go and consider the great runes. Radahn's great rune burns. It burns to resist the scarlet rot. It is active, consuming, and defiant. Miquella's great rune, the rune of abundance, is broken and discarded. Miquella abandoned his own source of strength because it was tied to the Golden Order. Radahn held on to his, even as it burned him alive, because it was his. This dichotomy, gravity versus charm, weight versus light, holding on versus letting go, is the core philosophical conflict of the DLC. Radahn held back the stars to preserve the gravity of the world. He wanted choices to matter. He wanted the physical world to dictate destiny, not the whims of a god who abandoned his own body. When we kill Radahn and release the stars, we are symbolically choosing light over weight. We are allowing the world to become untethered. And while this allows Ranni to usher in her age of stars, a different kind of freedom, it also allows Miquella to attempt his age of compassion, a different kind of slavery. Radahn was the anchor. He was the heavy object sitting on the map that prevented it from blowing away in the wind. By removing him, we unmoored the lands between. We made it lighter, yes, but we also made it less real. And look at the promised consort's sword attacks. In the second phase, they leave trails of light. These aren't the purple gravity trails of the Starscourge. They are the golden light of Miquella. The gravity magic has been diluted, infected by divinity. It suggests that Miquella is rewriting the laws of physics in real time, turning the crushing force of gravity into the blinding light of charm. Radahn fought to keep physics honest. He fought to keep the stars in the sky and the soldiers on the ground. He was the ultimate realist in a world of dreamers. And in the end, the dreamers won. They killed the realist and turned his corpse into a vehicle for their fantasies. So, the real reason Radahn held back the stars was to maintain the integrity of reality itself. He knew that if he let go, the world would dissolve into a dream, Miquella's dream. And as a warrior who lived and died by the cold, hard steel of his swords, a dream world where everyone smiles because they are forced to was the ultimate defeat. Now we return to the silence. I mentioned at the start of this analysis that Radahn's lack of dialogue in the final fight is the smoking gun. But I want to go deeper. I want to talk about the muzzle. If you look at the history of General Radahn, he is defined by sound. He is the red lion who roared at the stars. His festival is a cacophony of shouts and clashing steel. His soldiers sing with fire and fury. He is a character of volume, of presence, of noise. In the base game, even as a rot-addled beast, he howls. He screams at the sky. It is a primal sound, yes, but it is his sound. It is the sound of a living thing asserting its existence against the dying of the light. But in the shadow of the Erdtree, the promised consort is mute. Miquella has effectively muzzled the lion, and I would argue this isn't just because Radahn is a reanimated corpse. It is because Miquella's order has no room for the lion's roar. Miquella's order is soft, quiet, and gentle. It is a world where conflict is hushed by charm. The boisterous, chaotic energy of Radahn, the energy that inspired the festival, has been sanitized. This creates a terrifying contrast in the boss design. We are fighting the body of Mog, an omen, and the soul of Radahn, a lion. Yet the entity feels like neither. It moves with a rigid, mechanical grace. It lacks the beast-like desperation of Starscourge Radahn and the blood-crazed fervor of Mog. It is perfectly disciplined. It is a soldier who has been lobotomized into the perfect guard dog. And look at the armor description for the young lion set. It speaks of Radahn's golden years. Miquella is obsessed with this version of his brother, the young, beautiful, strong brother. He rejects the scarred, rotted veteran who held back the stars. He rejects the reality of Radahn's life in favor of an idealized memory. Miquella didn't resurrect his brother. He resurrected his action figure. This is the ultimate tragedy of the vow. Miquella claimed to love Radahn, but you cannot love someone if you refuse to accept who they became. Radahn became a survivor. He became a guardian who made hard choices. He became a rot-infested monster who refused to die. Miquella looked at all of that character growth, all of that suffering, and deleted it. He hit the factory reset button on Radahn's soul. I think this is why the fight feels so unsettling to longtime fans. We spent hours in the base game learning to respect the Starscourge. We learned about Leonard, about Sellia, about Jaren. We built a picture of a complex, tragic hero. And then the DLC presents us with a silent prop. It feels wrong because it is meant to feel wrong. From Software is showing us that Miquella's love is reductive. It reduces complex people to simple assets. And let's talk about the Light of Miquella attack, the massive orbital laser that ends the fight. This is the ultimate expression of Miquella's power. It is blinding, overwhelming light. It obliterates everything in the arena. Radahn, the master of gravity, is just the delivery system for this light. He holds us in place so Miquella can nuke us. It mirrors the relationship Radahn feared he would have. He is the tank holding aggro while the DPS, Miquella, casts the spell. Radahn spent his life being the main character of his own story, the hero of the Redmanes. In his death, he became an NPC in Miquella's questline. This erasure of identity is the real reason he fought so hard. Radahn knew that Miquella didn't want a partner. He wanted a tool. And Radahn, for all his loyalty to the Golden Order, was too proud to be a tool. He wore the lion armor to emulate Godfrey, the first Elden lord. Godfrey was a lord who led armies. He wasn't a puppet. Even when Godfrey was exiled, he marched away with his head high. Radahn was denied that dignity. So when we finally defeat the promised consort, and the memory plays, notice the sadness in the voice acting. Miquella sounds hopeful, innocent even. Promise me you'll be my consort. He sounds like a child asking for a toy. He has no concept of the horror he is asking for. He doesn't understand that asking a lion to wear a leash is a death sentence for the lion's spirit. Radahn understood. And that understanding is what drove him to conquer the stars. He tried to break the toy before Miquella could play with it. He tried to make himself unusable, uncatchable, unbreakable, and he almost succeeded. It took the combined efforts of the strongest demigod, Malenia, the deadliest warrior, the Tarnished, and a literal god, Miquella, to finally put the collar on him. It took 3 games worth of bosses to subdue one general. That is the measure of Radahn's will. He was the single hardest obstacle to the Age of Compassion, and in the end, he didn't surrender. He was stolen. As we approach the conclusion of this analysis, we must synthesize everything we have uncovered. The silence of the DLC boss, the conditional wording of the vow, the strategic holding of the stars, and the brutal reality of the resurrection. When we put all these pieces together, the image of General Radahn shifts dramatically. He is no longer the mad dog of the Shattering. He is the last guardian of the lands between. I would argue that Radahn is the only demigod who didn't try to break the world for his own gain. Ranni wanted to abandon the world for the stars. Rykard wanted to devour it. Mohg wanted to bleed it. Miquella wanted to hypnotize it. Only Radahn fought to keep it grounded. He fought to preserve the physical reality of the world against the encroaching void of space and the encroaching delusion of charm. This makes him the ultimate tragic hero of From Software's catalog. He isn't tragic just because he rotted or because he lost his mind. He is tragic because he was right. He looked at the options available: Ranni's cold night, Rykard's blasphemy, Miquella's tyranny, and he decided that the only honorable choice was to stop the clock. He chose stagnation over subjugation, and history punished him for it. The lore remembers him as a warmonger. The festivals celebrate his bloodlust. Malenia is remembered as the Blade of Miquella, a loyal sister. Radahn is remembered as the Starscourge, a destroyer. But the truth is the opposite. Malenia was the destroyer who broke Caelid. Radahn was the preserver who held the sky together. This misinterpretation of his legacy is the final insult. He sacrificed his mind to hold back the Astals and the Eclipse, and the world remembers him as a brute who just liked fighting. Even we, the players, fell for it. We spent 2 years memeing about his tiny horse and his Chad energy, missing the profound sadness of his existence. We didn't see a man fighting for his free will. We saw a cool boss fight. But the shadow of the Erdtree forces us to confront the truth. When we see him in that final arena, stripped of his personality, glowing with Miquella's light. We are seeing the bad ending Radahn fought for 1,000 years to prevent. We are seeing what happens when the Guardian falls. It also reframes the shattering war itself. It wasn't a stalemate because the demigods were equally matched. It was a stalemate because Radahn made it one. He was the anchor drag on the ship of history. He was strong enough to win, but he chose to draw. Because winning meant becoming Elden Lord in a world he no longer trusted, or worse, becoming the consort to a god he feared. So, he chose the third option, the Caelid option. He chose to turn his own kingdom into a wasteland rather than let it become a puppet state. He chose to burn from the inside rather than be charmed from the outside. It is a stubborn, messy, glorious refusal to submit. And I think that is why the community loves him, even before we knew the full truth. Deep down, we recognize that primal defiance. We recognize the spirit of a man who says, "I will not let go." Whether it is his horse, his gravity magic, or his free will, Radahn is the patron saint of holding on when everything else is trying to tear you away. Miquella may have stolen his body, he may have stolen his soul, but he could never steal the legend. The silence of the promised consort proves that the real Radahn, the loud, boisterous, gravity-wielding lion, is gone. He checked out. He refused to participate in Miquella's play. Miquella is puppeting a corpse, but the spirit of the Starscourge died on the dunes of Caelid. Free and howling at the stars he conquered. And so, we return one last time to the wailing dunes of Caelid. When we look at General Radahn now, howling at the sky, eating the corpses of his friends, we shouldn't just see a mad beast. We should see a man who was screaming no to the entire universe. He was a man who looked at the fate prepared for him, a fate of servitude masked as glory, and decided that he would rather burn the world down with war than submit to it. To me, this makes Radahn the most tragic figure in the entire mythos. We often romanticize him as the Chad general, the wholesome big brother who loved his horse, and he was those things. But he was also a victim of a cosmic game he tried desperately to rig. By holding back the stars, he wasn't just protecting Sellia, he was trying to create a world where his choices still mattered. He was trying to carve out a space where he could be the Red Lion, not the promised consort. But the cruel irony of From Software's storytelling is that his defiance is exactly what caused the suffering he tried to prevent. By pausing fate, he allowed the rot to fester. By refusing to die, he trapped his soldiers in a never-ending war. And by trying to escape Miquella's grasp, he forced Miquella to abandon everything, his flesh, his love, his morals, to come and get him. Radahn's resistance didn't stop the monster, it created one. In the end, Miquella won. The stars fell, the general died, and the soul of the lion was shackled to the will of the kind. It is a sobering reminder that in the lands between, strength is not enough. You can be the mightiest demigod. You can master gravity. You can hold back the heavens themselves. But you cannot defeat a narrative that has been written for you by someone else. If you take nothing else from this analysis, take this. The Starscourge conflict wasn't about territory. It was a war between two different types of power. The hard power of gravity and steel against the soft power of charm and fate. Radahn proved that you can stop the movement of the stars, but you cannot stop the march of a god who believes they are saving you. When you face him in the DLC, do not look at the golden light or the young face. Look at the eyes. They are empty. The lion is not there. He died in Caelid, surrounded by his men, holding the sky until his last breath. What remains is just a vessel, a testament to the terrifying persistence of Miquella's love. Thank you for watching. If this new perspective on Radahn changed how you see the general, leave a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the shadow of the Erdtree. And tell me in the comments, do you think Radahn ever stood a chance? Or was he doomed the moment Miquella chose him? I'll see you in the next one.